Hello and welcome back, everyone, to Wizard of Legend and Rocket Rabbit Commentaries. And in this episode, we did quite a bit of off-screen grinding in order to get in order to unlock a bunch of relics and a bunch of Arcana. We need to show off what we plan to use for a successful run. So, the run that to be perfectly honest, the cloak that I prefer to do for most of my runs is actually the blue one, Rule, which increases your damage and increases your armor. I love doing that one. But the one we're going to actually use this time is the, I forget what this one is actually called.
I am a banana.
We aren't a banana, we are a Thunderlord. And by Thunderlord, I mean we're going to be doing a run that is almost all exclusively Electric Arcana. The reason why is because, well, we plan on going all in on crit.
Well, you have mentioned numerous times that crit, as well as the enhancements you can gain that improve crit, are very important in this game and may well take you to the end.
Yeah. So, I really wish I could remember what the hell this robe is called. But this is almost my preferred loadout. I usually prefer to have Rule. Oh, that's right. This is the Awe. This is the Awe garb. The Awe garb increases critical hit damage and critical hit chance. And it's also best paired with Lightning Arcana because, again, they have the most, the highest hit count of most normal Arcana, with the exception of I think Aqua Beam, which Aqua Beam actually does hit 10 times. So, we ended up rolling into Wind Fortress first. There and you can see already that our playstyle with this is actually quite a bit different. We're quite dependent on using Shock Assault in order to lock down individual targets, then using our Volt Discs and Shock Nova in order to continue to knock them down, whilst also dealing some pretty significant electrical damage to them.
Like keep everybody around you stunned while you take turns hitting each one to stun them again until they die. Yeah, that's a pretty useful skill. It reminds me of Crimson Alliance.
Library.
Who even reads books anyway?
No, not us, because we don't need to. Haha.
We already read the books. And then we destroy the books so no one else can read them and learn what we know. Haha.
Alright, Shock Assault is honestly a tech and an Arcana that I'm supposed to use in order to get out of fights, because assuming that there is an enemy to link to, it's effectively another dash. However, I end up using it to start fights usually because I can follow it up with a Shock Nova, which will, usually stun a majority of my targets and build up enough signature charge for me to unlock a signature Shock Nova, which will, further lock them down and do additional damage. So yeah, I like Shock Assault. It's not as good as I think it is, to be perfectly honest, but it's good enough. You'll notice that we're still actually running the Vampire Eyeglasses, specifically because, well, since we're going all in on crit, having critical hits heal us early on is gonna make it so that it's much easier for us to, get to the later parts of the run.
Yeah, I would think any ability that lets you heal in a roguelike is at least worth looking into.
Yes. It's why one of my favorite relics is actually the Wings of Icarus, which allows you to heal every time you knock enemies into pits. It is honestly a really, really good one, but if you're going to run it, you have to run a bunch of Arcana that allow you to knock enemies into pits, and then you also have to hope that the maps that you get allow you to, well, knock enemies into pits a bunch, because not every map is like the wind or fire fortresses where there's just pits everywhere. And booyah! We spent 100 gold and a decent amount of health. Now our garb's passive is actually enhanced. As Annotations Gerdat mentions here, usually I find that the cloak enhancement is actually a waste of both health and money, because a majority of the time you don't get enough out of it to actually have it worthwhile. However, if you get it early on enough, it's actually really good to use for greed, and it's also decent in this case because I think it's supposed to be. Ooh, we got the Closet-Tomo. Unfortunately, the Closet-Tomo is a melee Arcana steroid, and none of the Arcana that we're going to be running are melee. As I was mentioning, the Garb enhancement is honestly really good majority of the time, but it very specifically requires you to understand going in that you're going to be fishing for it, and I usually am not. So I end up taking Rule as my usual Garb because the small amount of increased damage and the armor bonus are actually quite helpful for a long portion of the run without being steroided. Yeah, no.
Well, there are some setups because this is a game that the premise of is you're setting up and then you're executing.
Yeah.
That with some pieces of equipment are just asking for too much in the setup department. The Fleet Lancer.
Fleet Lancer is actually one of the easiest bosses. I put one of the easiest mini bosses. You'll notice that we got down like 40% of his health through one cycle. So yeah.
Nice.
Ooh, and it's the Wings of Icarus. Now every time we knock enemies into pits, we heal. Haha. It's quite nice. Now we also got the ability to enhance our Shock Assault, which makes it travel faster, and I think it also hits additional times.
Time to move the chess piece onto the board.
Now, thankfully, our level 3 on this run is actually Atlas, so we don't have to deal with level 3 Thunder Twins.
Well, how do you feel about that? Is you feel like the seed is either working for you or against you as you load up the run?
Ooh, I don't actually take notice of it until I don't usually take notice of it until we're almost there. To be perfectly honest, like Tier 1 Shu should honestly be something that I'm really hopeful for because dealing with Tier 3 Shu is not something that I actually am decent enough at. I just don't have all that much practice with it. But if I had to pick my favorite start, it's actually Tier 1 Thunder Twins. I hate fighting Thunder Twins, but having them on Tier 1 means I don't have to fight them later,
Right, because enemies level up as you advance in the run.
Well, enemies become more difficult. They don't necessarily level up, but they do get improved versions of themselves. I understand that it would be easier to say they level up, but they are different enemies. I mean, with the exception of the Chaos Spawn, because the Chaos Spawn effectively do level up. They are the same enemy. They just have faster attack patterns.
I see. So this game it's challenging, but it's also not one where you want to waste time just killing runs over and over again to try to get the best combination of tiers and bosses in the order that it forecasts for you, because they must forecast it for a reason.
Yeah. They forecast it specifically so that you can figure out what you're going to be going up against later on, so you can attempt to plan around that. And I like that. I do. I don't remember if Isaac actually does that because I've not actually played all that much of Isaac. I do recall that Isaac. Doesn't Isaac forecast? No, Isaac only forecasts bosses after you're already in their room, right?
Well, so Binding of Isaac is more like I don't think there's much in the way of like room generation. I think the map is pretty fixed. What is going to change is the RNG on the enemies and their attack styles, as well as a combination of what are you using that makes it feel like a different game experience every time. You get no preview. You have to. That's part of the fun and intrigue of Binding of Isaac is you have to discover how best to go through the game just by dying over and over and over again. There's no other way.
So how is the player naturally supposed to come across Mom then?
By freaking stumbling through the dungeon blindly until they find the pathway, of course.
Yeah. That's something that I absolutely...
And that's why the map doesn't change. You learn the map each time you play the game, and you get more familiar with it as you go.
Yeah, but that's something that I actually dislike about a good portion of modern high-quality roguelikes is the lack of forecasting is honestly a pretty big detriment to the player. Like, Tay and I picked up a roguelike several years back called Monster Train, and the big thing about that is that it was a roguelike deck builder, which is another reason why I dislike deck builders in general, where it would tell you it would attempt to tell you how your faction is supposed to be run, and then because the deck the cards that you get are effectively random, you the archetype that you're running could have one of two different win conditions, and if you're getting both of those win conditions, your run is effectively dead before you start.
Yeah, that, you know what? If for a roguelike, that's not, the worst thing in the world, because I think that every good roguelike should teach the player to not only expect to die, but to, exploit dying, because dying just means that you have to start from the beginning. But each time you start the game, you're more knowledgeable than you were the previous time.
At least in theory.
In theory, right. Like, well, what if the player is drunk? What if the player has a learning disability?
All right. In the next episode, we'll continue on with our all run. Be safe, everybody.